Good morning. Excuse me I'm a bit startled from the morning news, and I'll join Julie's prayer for the people of Israel, hostages, and humanity generally, whoever is human, and for the safety and peace of Israel. But I'm an archaeologist, a humble archaeologist, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things I've done. I've been an archaeologist for 25 years now, and lots of excavation. I had to pick some of the stuff. So what we'll do, I'll talk about the Archaeologist tunnel to begin with, which is like kind of an Indiana Jones kind of stuff. The more exciting. And then I think we'll talk briefly about what's new in El Araj. Whoever has heard Professor Notley's or been there to excavate, what's new in there, very briefly, and then talk about some of the pottery that Julie was kind enough to smuggle into the United States. Very convenient to us. And maybe some time for questions also at the end. So, the Archaeologist tunnel is a very, very interesting, maybe the most puzzling excavation I've ever participated in, and maybe the most puzzling excavation I ever heard of. You might know about the scores of Qumran, and which were found in the late 40s, 1940s, early 1950s, most of them. One of them is the copper score, which was found, as you can see there, and it's unique because all the other scrolls are made of leather or papyri, and this scroll is written on copper. It took them about 5 years just to open it. And when they open it, you can see it was inscribed into the copper, and what you have there is a list about 60 places where treasures were hidden. And the first one is in the ruin that is in the valley of Achor, under the steps, with the entrance at the east, a distance of 40 cubits, a strong box of silver and its vessels, with a weight of 17 talents. And then goes a number in Greek. Basically, the list is a list of vessels and tons of silver and gold. Needless to mention, nothing of that was found so far. But this the place I'm going to talk about is, if you've been to Israel, you see Jerusalem on the left side here on the map, and the Jordan River running down to the Dead Sea. And Qumran is right at the northern edge of the Dead Sea. Just a few miles west of it, in the midst of the Judean desert, there is a fortress from the 1st century, built by the Hasmoneans and later by King Herod the Great, and was used in the 1st century by them, by the descendants, and I'll show you in a few moments a picture of how the scenery looks. But one day a person approaches, it was the year 2000. The person here, Bob Morgan in the center, is an American pilot, served in Vietnam, and he approaches my friend Dr. Oren Gutfeld there on the right, and says to him, "Listen, I know where one of those treasures is hidden. And it's in the Judean desert. I have been digging there for 10 years by myself, and I want some help because I'm not getting anywhere. It's too much of a work." So apparently this guy, Bob, was coming twice a year from the United States, driving into the Judean desert by himself and digging a tunnel, so he claims, in the middle of the Judean desert, for 10 years in a row. Digging and digging and digging and digging. And he had fights with the Bedouins and all sort of adventures, and he realized he needs some proper work, and so he needs a license. So he approached some American universities, which were, well, didn't cooperate. And then he reached Dr. Oren Gutfeld. He was then like a master student, who brought Yaakov Kalman, the guy on the left, and me, another student, and we came take a look. But before we talk about the tunnel, I wanted to show you a bit about the Hyrcania fortress from the 1st century. You can see the ruins. You can see it's situated on a very high hilltop, natural hilltop, in mid of the Judean desert. There's nothing there. Like today, the valley, the Achor Valley, which you might remember from the book of Joshua, is situated just beneath this fortress. You can see the scenery, and today it's a firing zone of the IDF. So it's very hard to approach it. You can approach it only in high holidays and during weekends. On the top of that fortress, a monastery was built in the 5th or 6th century by the monks of the Judean desert. This is a church of it. You might be able to see the remains of the mosaic. And in the bottom of one of the cisterns, we also found the skulls of the monks of the 5th, 6th, 7th century CE. You can see Oren is visiting them there. And let's see about the tunnel itself. If you'd see this is our old Jeep named Moses, by the way. That's the first thing that Hannah and I ever bought, even before we got married. And you need the 4x4 car to get into there. And this is the valley of Schacha, which is also mentioned. The stream is also mentioned in the Copper Scroll. And I remind you that the first treasure was hidden in the valley of Achor, which is the flat land that you see in front, under the steps. And the fortress is right on top there, and in the bottom of that creek, you have an entrance. This is how the entrance looks like, and you see the steps. It's a chiseled tunnel that goes into the mountain, right beneath the fortress. So you can imagine it's a huge operation to dig in the middle of the desert in a firing zone. We had to do it only in high holidays for a week and then evacuate. And we got lots of equipment, help from Bob and his friends from the United States. And it took us 7 years to reach to what I will show you now. Season after season after season, a week there and a week there. And this is when we came into it, this was that Bob excavated, dug by himself. It was filled with silt. Silt flushed in by flash floods. No pottery, no archaeology whatsoever, except from the tunnel itself. And now it's pretty obvious to us that it is related to the 1st century, just as a fortress above it. But what is it? And who would chisel in the rock so deep? When we reached it, when Bob dug about 100 feet in, and then he stopped. There, in this point, we went in. And you can see here Yaakov Kalman. He was a handyman of the excavation, standing at the entrance of the tunnel before we started excavating. And it was very hard, compact dirt, silt. We had to use machinery to carve into it, and then you pack it into bags. And in some point, there was no air anymore. We had to pump air into the tunnel. And you can imagine working so deep, 100 feet, 200 feet into the tunnel. It's very hot, very humid. And we were all the time thinking about the people who chiseled it originally, which didn't have machinery, which didn't have air pumping, and they used oil lamps for their light, which also consumes oxygen. And it was a huge operation, and this is like a 600 pounds ship winch to pull the dirt out each time, and getting all it in and out, and with generators and whatever. We had in the first season, we had Bedouins stealing some of the stuff and wounding Bob, and stories from one day Hannah will write a book about the excavation itself, let alone the archaeology. And this is how it looks when you go in, and then you pull the dirt bags one after the other out. And we put about 500 work days into this tunnel. You can see I'm your humble servant in the center there, and Yaakov, and Oren, and many of the students. In the middle of the excavation, you can see the pile of dirt we were pulling out. And each year, this pile of dirt would be washed out by the flash floods downstream. One year, we were not that lucky, and it pushed the dirt back into the tunnel. It took us 2 years to get back to the same point. And the tunnel goes in and in 100 feet, 200 feet, and 300 feet deep in. It widens, and there is a column in the center. And I remember I was sitting at the step on the bottom there, and the late Professor Eshel was an expert for the Second Temple Judaism, sitting by me and saying, well, obviously this is one of the Hasmonean king's tombs. And whatever it may be, 300 feet in, someone chiseled that in, and it's steep, goes way deep in. Someone must have hidden there something very, very special. And I remind you, this is 7 years that I'm compacting here for a few minutes. And it was a lot of fun because we had great company there. Bedouin students and Americans working together with great food. I could eat that all day. Workers' food was hummus and labane and fresh onion and so on. And then we dig in. You can see me sitting there. And it's like 32 degrees slope. Just walking out as you are is hard. Not talking about carrying something with you, like chiseling or stone rubble or whatever. And this is like the widening. And you can see on our faces, we had very, very high expectation at this moment that we reached that widening. And then we continued another 60 feet in on the right wing, because it actually is a split, not a room, between two tunnels. And we took the right fork, and we dug another 60 feet, and we reached this. I still have the shivers every now and every time I tell this. Nothing. You can see Yusuf there, and me with the faces. There was nothing. I mean, someone cleaned it off. Stopped chiseling, cleaned it off. 360 feet into the mountain, and went away and left us with that. And we went to the other branch, and it was the same. So this is how it looks. You've got the fortress, the first century fortress on the top, the valley, Schacha, shadow valley at the bottom, and the tunnel going way deep, splits, and then stops. Any ideas? I mean, if any of you have a good idea, because I haven't so far haven't come up, not me and not anyone else. It's solid rock. Not only that, there is another tunnel on the other side of the valley, of the creek. And this was only about 200 feet in. And again, nothing there. So as an archaeologist, as a scientist, I need to understand what things are by comparing them, parallels. For instance, if I'd see a square table and a round table and I can compare them and see there is some resemblance, I can understand what is a table. And so we were looking for parallels around the world, and the only thing which somewhat resembles is the tunnel in Comagene, Turkey, which is only about 50 feet in, and it has an inscription in the entrance which says this is where the king of Comagene, that city in Turkey, was buried. But this is by the city, and it has an inscription. It makes sense that you dig like 60 feet in, not 360 feet in the middle of the desert, and have no room to put anything. Even if it was looted, you must have had a room in the end of it. And you must have known that it would be filled with a silt of the flash floods. And today you can visit the place. If you come to Israel and you take me to guide you there, because it's not easy to find. We blocked it halfway, so no more flash floods go in. You can climb in and go down on the way. And I mean, if you like, let's hear a couple of people. If you have any ideas about what it may be, maybe the salvation will come from you. Anyone wants to comment? You're puzzled just as I am. And so this is definitely the most mysterious excavation I have ever done. And we are now almost 20 years after we finished the excavation, and no one has any idea for what it is. And I'll tell you one more puzzling anecdote about it. As archaeologists, we are totally convinced that this has something to do with the first century fortress above the tunnel. But we found an ibex, a female ibex skeleton, midway, washed in by one of the flash floods during those 2,000 years. And it was carbon dated in the University of Arizona. And it gave the date of 580 BC, the time of the destruction of the first temple, plus minus 20 years. Now, how is it possible that an ibex, which was then about 600 years old, would be washed completely into a tunnel, which is only 2,000 years? So archaeology is a lot of fun, but mainly questions. And for me, it's really one of the things I constantly go back and think about. What could it be? And basically, what are we missing in order to do that. And needless to say, the treasure was not there. So we need to still keep looking. Now, for the next subject, some of you have seen already. Julie was kind enough to bring us some pottery. And I'd like to take you to this journey because it's how do we do it? Okay? Give you some sense of how do my daily job is mostly typing on the computer. But when I get to excavate, I need to see where to dig. This is like a site. You might see the square stones. There's some pottery scattered there. In Israel is 30 times smaller than Texas. And it's got 30,000 archaeological sites, which is from it, say maybe 0.5% was excavated so far. So there's lots to excavate. And if we totally understand the concept of a tel, a mound, which settlement after settlement goes, one is ruined and you build another above it, and then you have to peel it back like an onion. And the further you go, the older you get, right? And the idea was first described by this Sir Flinders Petrie only in 1898. And the whole he changed the world of archaeology, and he also understood that in each layer you have different pottery, different types, different styles. This is just an example. Oil lamps, bowls, craters, juglets, jugs, jars, and so on, by the time periods. I mean, we know, you could think of, say, iPhone 14, iPhone 13, iPhone, and so on, right? It's obvious to us that things change through time, but those families, horizons of vessels could remain the same for 300, 400 years easy. So for our ancestors, the concept of changing with time was not that obvious as it is to us with the iPhones. And this had to be, this table and many others has to be gathered up for many works in the field to find the pottery shards and to relate them. First, you relate them by levels, right? I find this in this height and lower, so I know relatively which is earlier and which is later. And then you have to pinpoint it into a BC AD date. And this you do if you have coins, like this coin, for instance, which is a Roman 2nd century coin from Tyre, the city of Tyre on the coast of Lebanon, and you find it by a piece of pottery. So this is 2nd century CE, and you find a pottery by it, so you know that the pottery, that vessel, is also 2nd century. And then you go to another site and find the same type of pottery, then you know that this type is again 2nd century, and what's below it is earlier, what's above it is later, and so on. And you might be able, if you're lucky, to find a destroyed city. I mean, it wasn't lucky for those guys. It's very lucky for archaeologists. Archaeologists love two things: catastrophes and dumps. All the good stuff are there. I mean, imagine that, God forbid, this hall collapses on us. Say an earthquake. The archaeologists who will dig us one day will be very happy because they've got everything in. But say there is a pre-shake and we all run out and we take our stuff. The archaeologists will have less to find. So we are happy when people are dead. Actually, when I joined the first excavation I worked in, my supervisor told me, listen, we should do that and that very precisely. We have to document everything so we can take the data out of it. But remember one thing, all the people you're dealing with are dead. You're not going to help them. You're not a doctor. And if you make a mistake, you haven't killed anybody. So if we find a destruction that we can relate to an event, say the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD or in 586 BC, we can say, okay, this is that date, and we can learn about the pottery from that time, and so on, and the people who lived there or eventually died there. This is how all finds in Israel find themselves eventually stored in a storehouse in the IAA, in the Israel Antique Authority. It's a huge storehouse with millions of finds put there, documented, in order that future researchers will be able to go back and check it. Because once you've excavated, you pulled out the finds, you pulled out the dirt, nobody can repeat your research. So you have to do a very good documentation of what you do. And everything goes into that storehouse and you can approach it. Now, if you take a look at pottery, which is a main artifact that we're dealing with, there are different kinds of them, different types. And let's pull this one out. I hope you can see that in the back. It's a kind of a funnel made of pottery. And this doesn't mean much, but if you'd find this one, can you see it's the same piece? This is what we call jara, a drinking water jug, which is about 200 years old. And I hope you can see that in the back. I've got a couple of pieces with green and yellow color on it. Can you see that? And this, if you take this is decoration. It's actually not a paint, it's glass, it's a glazing. If any of you have been to doing some pottery stuff and workshops, you'd know that you can glaze pottery. You put melted glass on it in colors. And this technique was invented 1,200 years ago. Actually, I don't know if it's politically correct to say, but they tried to imitate the Chinese porcelain. And they weren't able to. So instead, they put glass on it so it will look like it is Chinese. So this is glazing. And what kind of vessel would you decorate? Obviously, vessels that are meant to be on the table for serving, rather than, say, storage jars in the storehouse, right? So these are bowls decorated with glazing, and you might be able to see how it looks as a complete vessel and how it looks as a piece. For me, a piece, which is, some are more distinctive, obviously. This piece is good enough for dating. So this is a 1,200 years old bowl, glazed bowl. And let's see what's next here. And these are like monochrome green or yellow, but this is, you might be able to see, this has got both shades on it. Just like the bowl here, which is also 1,200 years old. This is what you'd find in a common household in a house in Israel 1,200 years ago. If we go, can you think what this vessel might be? You have here a handle of this, you see? Same handle. This is a cooking pot. Cooking pot of the 1st century. And you could think, what do you cook in a closed cooking pot rather than an open cooking pot? And this is just tells me that we are all basically human because we do the same. We cook the same. We eat the same. And when I see this, this is probably goes for soup or something which is wet rather than an open cooking pot which would be fine, right? I have no idea. I never spoke to those people 2,000 years ago. Unfortunately, I would like to. And they never left me a note. This is my closed cooking pot in which I boil, don't know, whatever. But we can resonate from our lives as humans to their lives 2,000 years ago. So this is, when Jesus had his meals, it was cooked in this kind of a cooking pot.
Did they never write down the recipe?
So, generally not, unfortunately, but we're fortunate enough to find remains of yeast in a jug from the 1st temple period about 2,800 years ago. And those yeast were still alive. And they multiplied them. And there is a recipe for, in Egypt, there's a recipe for beer. Because this is what they had in Egypt. The alcohol type they had in Egypt was beer because they have wheat. In Israel, it was wine because they had grapes, still today. So they made beer from those yeasts. And in the laboratories of Bar Ilan University and Ariel University, they say it didn't taste good. And another, what is this? It's a piece of glass, Roman glass. They've been using glass vessels for 2,500 years, and this is how it looks when you have more pieces of it. This is excavation in Tiberias, by the way. So glass is also a very good find if you have it. And we have a series of, this is this is how we present it archaeologically, because each archaeologist needs to be able to compare what what I have found to what he found. So we draw it in a specific way, and you might be able to see that this piece is actually the one parallel to the one in the center. We call it a hollow mouth crater. This is dated 2,800 years ago, from the time of the 1st temple. And we have this one? Yeah. This one is a cooking pot from the same period. I hope you can see the profile more or less. There's that one on the top right. If you go back 3,000 years to the time of King David and King Solomon, this is what you would find in their house. You see jars, storage jars, flasks, cooking pots, open cooking pots, and so on. And here's one. That's a piece of the one on the bottom left. So this is 3,000 years old from the time of King David. I don't know if he specifically ate from those pots, but just to give you an idea. You should be aware of that 99% of what their life we can't find anymore. Because probably that cooking pot had a steering wooden spoon to it. And the wood does not preserve. The clothes do not preserve. The people do not preserve. The lives, the names, the loves are not there anymore. And so we have to reconstruct as much as we can from that percent that we find. And this one is like this piece, no, this one. You might be able to see it's got a shiny red burnish to it. It's a small juglet, it's about this big. And I would like to have a few people guess how old is this piece. Raise your hands and give a number. It doesn't cost you anything. I won't be charging you about that. 4,000 years. 200,000 years. Is it 2,400. Anyone? You want to? Raise your hand if anyone wants to shout a number. Again, it doesn't cost you anything. Take a risk here. $10,000. This is all. This specifically is from Tel Hatzor, the largest mound in the land of Israel, which was it was 850 dunams, huge mound. And this is early Bronze 1A, which is 5,300 years old. And the pottery was invented, the concept of making pottery from dirt was invented 10,000 years ago in Israel, among other places parallelly. And you were giving in higher numbers, just to give you an idea, I've been excavating a flint quarry, like hand axes, which is 300,000 years old in the northern Israel, in Galilee. And the earliest humans reaching Galilee was about 2.5 million years ago. Okay. No, there's one thing. You might know this lady. And that's a coin, as she always says, that you didn't let me take. That's, by the way, an M coin. Goes for 40, 40 numia of the 6th century CE, Byzantine period, the Eastern Roman Empire. So coins are very good because they have a date on them. Like they have an emperor that we know, so we can give a date to them. I showed you the 2nd century CE coin from the city of Tyre, and one of the most coins I care about is this small coin, and it's got a vine leaf on one side and a juglet on the other side. And it says in ancient Hebrew, the 2nd year for the freedom of Jerusalem. This was minted by the rebels, Jewish rebels against the Romans in the first revolt in the year 68. Not 1968, 68. And this is the way they declared war on the empire of Rome, by minting their own coins and not using the Roman coins and not paying taxes to the Romans anymore. And we know how it ended, because in year 70, the Second Temple was burned. But this is a coin of the Jewish rebels, basically my ancestors, almost 950 years ago, and I was very privileged to find it. Okay, so it's very hard to compare how much is a coin, because, inflation and stuff. But this is a small change. I would estimate it as 2 days of a worker's wage. Something like that, plus minus. And if you'd have like this dinar of Tyre, it's about 2 weeks of work. Just to give you a notion. And if we are dealing with coins, you haven't seen this either? The moment it will. But please don't take pictures of that because it hasn't been published yet. Mm-hmm. That's a gold coin found in El Araj a year ago. And this is the Emperor Neron. The coin is minted in the year 63 CE. And a gold coin found among a cache of 83 coins, which is one of them, and I'm proud to say that our kids found it. And they're part of the staff of working in the excavation, and then they found it, and you can imagine finding this kind of a cache. Look at the beautiful coin. Gold is gold. You can't ignore that. Silver coins. These are from Tyre. This is a shekel. If you read about the shekel and the story with Peter and Jesus, this is the shekel they're talking about. And this is how they found it. Yeah. And one thing before I go to El Araj is one thing that Julie again here cherishes very much is, it's going to work. Anyway, ignore the bottom picture. This is Julie's necklace, and it's got a square glass, blue glass artifact in it. And this is actually a piece of a church. This is an original church glass mosaic, still intact in Sinai, in a monastery in Sinai, and this is what Julie found, which was evidently in an apse, in the altar, above the altar in the church from 1500 years ago. And just to leave you a few minutes for questions, the ones who have been following the El Araj excavation, and this is how it looks now, more or less. You can see in the background the Jordan River and the Sea of Galilee, and the site is right on the water, whoever hasn't been there yet. And you can see in the middle of the picture, you can see the church. And how can we tell it's church? Because we have the apse facing east. And what's the goal of the last season was, so we have a monastery here which is dated about 500, 600 CE. The question is, if we are trying to prove that this is real Bethsaida, how far down does the tradition go? As we have an inscription there dedicated to Saint Peter, that means that in the 5th and 6th century, they perceived this as the place of Peter, where Peter was born. But can we see an earlier remains? First, earlier, like 4th century. And secondly, can we say what they perceived is the relics of the house of Saint Peter himself? And this is usually in the holiest place in the church, as you know, is the altar. So you would look right beneath the altar. And what we've done is, you see the apse here, right? This is the church and the apse. And we took the mosaic of the apse away, and dig beneath it, and you can see in the center of the apse there's a piece of a wall. And this wall dated by the pottery and coins to the Roman period, to the time of Peter and Jesus. And this is where the inscription says, above this house of the Saint Peter. So, saying carefully, as let's put it in two ways. As an archaeologist, I would say, in apparently the 4th century, people believed that this is the house of Peter. And if you'd ask me with no academical obligation there, I would say that we have here evidently Bethsaida and the house of Peter in this picture, which, in contrast to the first, is the tunnel I showed you before. In Bethsaida, El Araj, we have the best find we can ever wish for, and we will still look for some more. Questions? I hope you have some.
How can you tell if a artifact is pottery or just another rock?
Basically, it's archaeologists have been gathering that data for 150 years, and it's you are obligated to publish that data and show what you find, and then you can tell. It's not easy. It's if you'd approach it later before you leave here, and you take a look, you'd see that this is different. But it is not straightforward. And sometimes someone would find something in a dig and ask me, Achia, what it is. And I wouldn't be able to say if it's man-made or not, and even if it's man-made, what it is. But for most artifacts, I would be able to tell generally what it is and how old it is. This is knowledge that's been gathered by archaeologists.
Achia.
Yeah.
So, of course, we've been there and we enjoyed the trip, and we plan on coming back as soon as we can and
Please
help
go.
you dig. But the question I have is it possible to get a tour of that warehouse?
Sorry?
Is it possible to tour the warehouse where you have all the artifacts stored?
Well, it's very hard. I was able to take a few people there, so it might be arranged, but I can't promise it. Because it's not a tourist attraction. It's really a warehouse for scientists. But my family was there, and yeah, I might. But you need to reach Israel first. I'm not. This is your side of the deal. Yeah.
As you were showing the pictures and describing, y'all were descending down the tunnel and pumping air into the tunnel. Do you have a sense if they didn't have that kind of assistance and help, how far they would tunnel down before it was kind of impossible? You couldn't actually work down there without enough oxygen. And second question, with them chiseling like they did how long do you think that would have taken someone to get as far as y'all descended into the tunnel?
I'll begin with the second question because it's applicable to any building or whatever you find. How long does it take to do it, to make it? And it's all about how many people you deploy in doing that. And we have no idea. But it's definitely, this specifically the tunnels, it needed, supplies, water, food. I mean, even if it was slaves or political prisoners that you would like to work for you, they need, some appliances there. So I can't tell you how long, but it's a major, it took us 500 labor days with air and electricity and intercom and whatever. And they didn't have air pumping. I mean, I don't see how they did it. I don't see how they did it, but I would believe that they did have a winch pulling the dirt out. I can't think of any way. I mean, just climbing it up. They must have had a winch that was positioned outside and pulled things out. And the thing is that there's steps all the way. So if they had a winch, you can't do it on the steps, right? You have a smooth surface, and then stop, chisel the steps, and be gone, which makes even less sense.
You don't think they were digging for water like Hezekiah's tunnel?
No, I mean, they were well aware about the geology and hydrology and where do you dig for water, and that's not the place to look. And secondly, there is a very elaborate water system, water channeling from water rainfall into the fortress. And this is like, 800 feet below the fortress. Yeah. Doesn't make sense. And I mean, as the water goes in, it all drains in the flash flood, so.
Have you ever found the factories where they built ovens to make all of this pottery?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, this kind of a bowl with the yellow-green glaze. There's a factory that was made in Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, again 1,200 years ago. Sometimes you're fortunate enough to find the factory, so you learn about the techniques and mainly the origin of the vessels, but.
Well, you know, it takes a lot of heat to do that. Was this place forested back in those days, or was it still naked?
Basically, more or less the same as you see now.
Well, where did they get the wood?
Sorry, next way.
Quick question on the students that work for you. Where do they come from? What schools are most involved? Is it across the world? You know, I'm assuming it's not just Americans.
So there's a few manpower resources for excavation. You can imagine this is all excavation are only done by 10 fingers of people. I mean, there's no other way to do it. I don't believe in 1,000 years there'll be a machine that will do archaeology, because you need to really do it by your hands. And so first we have the volunteers, like people from here, which basically, for me, are the best because they come with devotion. And devoted people are the best. And secondly, we have students that learn archaeology, and one of the courses is digging course. I had 3 weeks digging in Tel Dor by the Sea of Galilee, and this comes with a lot of responsibility because you have also to teach them and exams and so on. Sometimes it's more burden. And thirdly, you'd have paid workers. Like in the last year, we had no other possibility in LRH but to dig with paid workers. We have a group of Bedouins that we work with, and a very good group. And I've been working with them for 10 years. So,
do you have any concerns for hazards like venomous snakes or insects?
So yes, but snakes would run away. Scorpions do not. I should tell you my other specialty except from research, is delivering the knowledge of archaeology to the wide audience, like lectures, tours, and so on, and also by giving everybody a chance for first hand excavation. Not only if you come for 2 weeks to El Raj, but if you'd like an hour, for instance, in biblical Chorazim, mentioned in Mark 11, one of the places Jesus preached, we excavate this village with people who come to tour Israel. And one of the places they come is Chorazim for 3 hours. I take them around and then we dig for an hour or two. And so I really believe that everybody should have access to archaeology. And the best way is to dig. And one of the excavation I do with Israeli kids, we found a black widow spider. And the kids asked me, hey, Yahya, what's that? And then I called them all around and told them, listen, do not touch this. But I know of only one archaeologist who died in excavation. He came across a hornet's nest, and apparently he was sensitive. And this was 1965, if I'm not mistaken. That's the last archaeologist in Israel that I know died in an excavation. Okay, thank you guys. And one more questions?
Was the pottery formed thrown on a wheel, or was it by coil?
So the pottery wheel made was invented about 4,000 years ago. And since then, most of the pottery is made on wheel. And the last piece I want to show you, you can see the wheel fingerprints of the potter, not Harry Potter, the potter who made it back then. And you can see the fingerprints of the potter that made it. This is 2,000 years old jar from biblical Magdala. So supposedly Jesus visited Magdala, and I don't know if he drank from this jar or served from this jar, but I would like to think so.
That's going to end our session today, but if you have additional questions, you're welcome to go up there and talk to Ahia and look at the pottery. Thank you for being here.